Dragon Ball Xenoverse 3 has just been announced and already the speculation is rampant. One of the biggest points of contention is whether or not this game is a reboot of the Xenoverse series. This may seem like a silly question at first, but there's a lot more to this than you may think. Over the years, Super and Daima, both projects with heavy involvement from Toriyama, have introduced tons of contradictions that simply break Xenoverse's lore. It's very possible Toriyama is going to go back to some of his original ideas for Dragon Ball Online, while ignoring other ideas that originated in DBO, but were heavily developed in Xenoverse 1 and 2. Besides that, Xenoverse 2's final DLC also seems to be teasing the end of the Time Patrol, so let's break down and try to answer the question: is Xenoverse 3 a reboot? Before we talk about the in-universe reasons for why this Xenoverse series may be rebooting, let's talk about why we're here in the first place, and that's the many narrative contradictions introduced by Super and Daima. When Xenoverse first released, much of its inspiration came from Dragon Ball Online, an MMO with heavy narrative input from Toriyama. The developers of Xenoverse took some concepts from DBO, such as Xeno Trunks, Supreme Kai of Time, the Time Patrol, Mira and Toa, the whole time-traveling conflict, and greatly expanded on them to the point they almost became something else. For example, in Dragon Ball Online, the Supreme Kai of Time is never mentioned in-game and is only briefly mentioned in a guidebook where it said she scolded Trunks for messing with time and he joined the Time Patrol to make amends. Xenoverse took this little bit of lore and created the Supreme Kai of Time, at which point they created Toki Toki City and the Time Nest as a lair for the Time Patrol, which did not exist in Dragon Ball Online or any guidebooks. Another example is the brief mention in a Dragon Ball Online guidebook that Toa and Mira have a son named Fu who will have a big influence on the world when he grows up. Out of this small mention, Xenoverse created the Fu that we now know, a whole character with his own aspirations and personality, all originating from a Dragon Ball Online guidebook as a JPEG with a vague hint at his future. These are just a couple of examples of taking one minor concept in a guidebook and fleshing it out to where you can see it's gone in a completely different direction than where Toriyama himself may have taken it. Though there's also times where they stick close to the history of the world established in DBO and basically adhere to its lore. For example, Boo wanting a companion and then essentially creating his own race of Majin comes directly from Dragon Ball Online, and Xenoverse adapts that concept basically intact. However, like I said, for every time they basically rip something straight from Toriyama, they also take one small tidbit and build an entire narrative around it that is later retconned. I don't say this like it's a bad thing though, it's just acknowledging the reality that Xenoverse took ideas from DBO and made them their own. When Ioku was talking about Toriyama's deep involvement with Xenoverse 3 with regards to the world building and characters, it made me quickly research and realize the reason why the Time Patrol aren't heavily featured in the Xenoverse 3 trailer is likely because those ideas from Xenoverse that you may think are a big deal are, in reality, a small footnote for Toriyama that he honestly likely forgot or just doesn't feel like reusing them. We also see what looks to be a demon in the Xenoverse 3 trailer. This is another big problem. The concept of demons in the lore of Xenoverse was, admittedly, pulled from online and interviews, but it's clear that with Daima, Toriyama has changed his mind on what the demon realm and its inhabitants actually are. There are no evil Kai born from bad fruit. Instead, there are Glens, and some are chosen to be Kai, while others are not. Essentially, Demigra as a concept just can't exist now. I could go on and on about how the demon realm of Daima and Xenoverse simply can't coexist, but I think you get the picture. Another contradiction to Xenoverse that shows Toriyama has largely moved on from those concepts is the fact that Trunks from Super exists. Obviously, you could explain this away as Xenotrunks being from a split timeline, but that also really goes against the rules established that they must preserve the timeline after Xenotrunks altered his own. This is also not to mention a split timeline explanation doesn't make sense, as the timeline would need to split shortly after Trunks returned to his timeline in Dragon Ball Z, as that's when Klonoa recruited him. In Super, no such recruitment takes place, and years later, Goku Black attacks. This is another contradiction that shows that when Toriyama was writing Super, he did not factor Xenotrunks into his story at all. I could go on and on about contradictions, but I know what some of you are thinking. But Toon Raider, Dragon Ball is full of contradictions. Can't we just look over this? And yes, we can. Contradictions from previous lore in Dragon Ball are always glossed over when moving on to the next thing, but the next thing is always treated as the new canon. For example, Toriyama drew the special Bardock into his manga. However, after he did Dragon Ball Minus, that version of Bardock has been the one that has stayed in the main narrative since then. Similarly, with all the contradictions introduced by Daima and Super that invalidate aspects of Xenoverse and Dragon Ball Online, we can see that those are no longer being considered as part of Toriyama's canon going forward. This may be why Xenoverse 3's trailer shows the Great Saiyaman Squad going out and investigating incidents across West City instead of the Time Patrol. It may also be why the new central location is West City instead of Kanton City and the Time Nest. It may also explain why you're working with the Capsule Corporation and Bulma instead of the Time Patrol and the Supreme Kai of Time. The Time Patrol, the Time Nest, and Supreme Kai of Time are not mentioned anywhere on any listings of the game. They only mention West City, the Great Saiyan Squad, and exploring the Dragon Ball world. I believe when Toriyama was involved with this game's development, he vaguely recalled some of his original concepts in Dragon Ball Online revolving around time travel, and simply built a new story around it using his more recent lore from the past several projects. As a result of Xenoverse 1 and 2 crafting entire narratives out of his minor notes that Toriyama likely forgot or chose to overlook, much of what was established in these games has been invalidated and will likely not be used in the third game. Keep in mind, this is also a Toriyama several years after Dragon Ball Online, who has created plenty of new concepts in Super and Daima. He's less interested in establishing a version of the Time Patrol in Age 1000 like he once did in DBO. Instead, he wants to utilize Gamma 1 from Superhero, a recent creation of his, and create a squad based around the iconography of the Great Saiyaman, a concept he was toying around with as recently as Dragon Ball Super's Superhero prequel arc with Toyotaro. But I should say, just because Xenoverse 3 appears to be retconning the major aspects of Xenoverse 1 and 2's Time Patrol narrative, it appears much of the lore from Dragon Ball Online that Xenoverse paid homage to is staying intact. We can see from the trailers that Brett is likely a student of the new Crane School, as he's seen wearing the outfit of a spiritualist from Dragon Ball Online. We also see that West City has truly grown by Age 1000, and the Earthlings of the world are fully aware of Saiyans and likely have already interbred with them. We know this because there's an Uzaru sign in the streets alongside a person with a tail, who is very likely an Earthling with latent Saiyan DNA. Our player character being able to turn into a Super Saiyan is also a likely piece of evidence to support this. This is speculative, but Bulma being present in this game also presents the possibility that time travel is a part of this game as well. Keep in mind, Xenoverse did not create the concept of time traveling in Dragon Ball. Toriyama himself did that in the Android Saga with Future Trunks, and then the idea was reused to a greater extent in Dragon Ball Online. With Bulma being involved with Great Saiyaman Squad, sending them out to investigate incidents, I wouldn't be surprised if these incidents are time rifts that have opened up and sucked people through them, a concept first seen in Dragon Ball Online. Essentially, What I'm saying is, I believe they are rebooting the main narrative featured in Xenoverse 1 and 2 while staying true to the core, minor concepts that originated from Dragon Ball Online, all while taking into account new lore from Toriyama that essentially overwrites everything we thought we knew from Xenoverse's main story. A big argument against all of this is, if this is a narrative reboot of the broader Xenoverse storyline, why even call it Xenoverse 3? And honestly, you have a point. But this kind of thing isn't unheard of. Games like Final Fantasy, Pokemon, and Dragon Quest do it all the time, where every game essentially stands on its own. Also, I should mention, part of me also believes Toriyama did this whole new story that completely overwrites Xenoverse's lore because he either forgot or just didn't care to line them up because he has his own vision in mind and nobody pushed back, similar to how he named the second Super movie Dragon Ball Super Superhero and nobody ever corrected him. But okay, you're probably wondering if they're gonna explain this in-game, and honestly, I have no clue. They could realistically just start Xenoverse 3 in the new storyline and not explain anything. However, Xenoverse 2's final DLC trailer teases it as The Last Patrol, and seems to be an epic confrontation that promises to be the final battle of Xenoverse 2. Because the DLC isn't out yet, I can't exactly comment on whether or not it ends with the Time Patrol winning, preserving time forever, and retiring, or creating a whole new universe, or Fu winning and resetting the Xenoverse timeline, restoring the Demon Realm to what we know in Daima. It's just all open to interpretation at this point. All I can say for sure is that it definitely feels like a final goodbye to the story we've known so far. What do you think about everything I've discussed in this video? Do you agree or disagree? Let me know in the comments below. Like this video if you enjoyed and subscribe for more videos like this, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace off.